long as this Western tradition of philosophy remains intact, we're never going to delink ourselves from that. And thus, we're never going to realize that there's a whole nother fucking world of philosophy out there, for instance. And we're definitely not going to realize that by maintaining this fucking veneer, if you will, by continuing to remain linked to the Eurocentric tradition, these issues of shit like the Indian problem, these issues of shit like immigration reform and for-profit prison industries and how fucking people of color are statistically higher represented in fucking prisons than, you know, our non-people of color counterparts, namely Europeans, right? Those of European descent. You don't talk about that kind of shit. It's just not even an issue anymore, which would lead you to believe that it's not an issue anymore, right? And again, this is very fucking convenient. This is a very convenient reading of not just history, but of the present and the future as well, right? For those of you who, it's just another one of the many things I'm going to fucking promise you I'm going to talk about in the future. But for those of you who watch the Slavoj Zizek and the Jordan Peterson podcast, if there's anything that you take away from that, let it be the fact that their fundamental beef that they had stems from the fact that there's basically two types of people in the modern world of philosophy, right? There are those who essentially, I'm just glossing over it because it's not the fucking podcast to do this, right? There are those who believe that history is over, quote unquote, that everything is settled, all the issues are settled, and then all that's left to do, we have the conditions necessary for people to continue to advance in life, such as democracy, capitalism, fucking, citizenship, all that kind of shit. And that has been the biggest obstacle, the biggest hindrance to freedom. Historically, they're going to want to argue. And since those things are now settled, all that's left to do is just make sense of the rest. Okay. And then you have the competing fucking view. The Zizek, not as specific. I'm not trying to essentialize him, but this is kind of like the beef that they come to, right? Who say, no, dude, like, yes, all that shit is great. But there's still so many fucking issues that need to be reconciled in order for those particular issues to be worth even more than what they are now, right? We need to reconcile shit like what it means to be a citizen. We need to reconcile shit like what our fucking education is for, okay? Because where it stands now, it's not good. It's not fucking perfect. It's nowhere near what it could be if we continue along our trajectory and try to find better alternatives for it, okay? So how this relates to this whole fucking podcast is part of us will want to say shit like, man, yeah, you're right. We're living in America. It's the best time ever to be alive. How can you even fucking argue against that? To which I'll say, you're right. However, why is it, okay, that prisons are tantamount to modern day slavery, for instance, okay? And that they are, that even though we in America have only 5% of the population, but 25% of the prison population, right? And that of 37% of that is comprised of fucking either black people or 32% is comprised of fucking quote unquote Hispanics. Like, that's obviously a fucking issue, bro. And until we address that issue, this whole fucking myth that that history is over and that we can just continue our fucking march towards modernity is reconciled. Like, no, bro, that's a fucking huge issue that needs to be addressed. But again, we can't address that issue if we aren't armed with the philosophical toolkit necessary to do so, right? Thus, the whole importance of delinking and the inherent fucking identitarian aspect of hood philosophy, right? So when it comes to like fucking education, prisons, right? If I could leave you with one thought, because I think I'm getting pretty close to that fucking hour long mark. Fucking time flies when you're having fun, at least for me, certainly, right? If I could leave you with this fucking, the one thing in terms of prison and the Indian problem and all that kind of shit, I just want you to consider the fact that, these for-profit industries are exactly that. The for-profit prison industries are exactly that, right? They are businesses that need people in them in order to fucking continue generating revenue, right? And one great way to do so is by problematizing fucking indigenous, neo-indigenous, and to this, I say neo-indigenous, that's actually the use of this gentleman named Christopher Emdin, a great scholar that I'm really following his work right now and I love it. But what he refers to neo-indigenous is essentially it's his way of saying black communities, right? Because they've been, uprooted from their indigenous land, Africa, and brought to America and become, and in doing so, they have a lot of the issues that we as indigenous, either tribalized or detribalized people face, and thus he associates them as neo-indigenous, right? So these for-profit prison industries, for instance, they're a great way of monetizing these indigenous and neo-indigenous bodies because you do yourself two favors. The first of which being you rid yourself of their presence in the public space, and the second of which being you monetize their being within your prison, right? Now, this is not a fucking conspiracy, bro. Again, if you just read into the history of the fucking United States, if you read into the current trajectory of these for-profit prisons, you'll realize, and this is the point that I was going to get to before I get to my next point, and that is that they're directly targeting fucking communities who have been improperly educated, right? Namely, those who have been miseducated, like ourselves, right? And the reason why I mention that is because in order to decide where they're going to build these prisons, last time that I checked, they could have raised it, they could have lowered it, but the last time I checked, they decide to do so based on the reading level of a given community, which is that of a fourth grader. Okay, so they're going to say if the reading level within a given community is at or lower than the fourth grade reading level, these motherfuckers are going to commit crime. And then you just poof, you extrapolate that further into many of the problems that we face here still to this day as, you know, indigenous, neo-indigenous peoples trying to fucking continue, just trying to integrate, if you will, to the settler colonial project that is the United States of America.